Tasha, are we going to record this on Zoom also?
I was just about to do that. Why don't you go
Okay.
ahead? For some
Oh,
reason, my
hold
screen
on.
isn't giving me the option.
We had a little mix up with the video. Just a sec.
Here we go.
Okay, hold on. There was a little problem. Is it? It said we're being live. Okay, I guess we're live streaming. I got a weird message, but I guess it's in place. So, like usual, the
Okay.
technology has ghosts in it. But welcome, folks. Welcome to our ongoing conversations with the Joko. As we have been going through the 9 areas of people activity and trying to imagine and build a better world than the one we're living in. Some more humane and just structures. We've been doing this for, I think it's really been about almost 3 years now that we've been having these conversations. We kind of stumbled into them, um, doing a program on education and what a liberatory, emancipatory education would look like. And then the Joko, in our internal conversations thought, well, since we talked about education in that way, why don't we go through all of the areas of people activity, the way they've been outlined by Neely Fuller and popularized by Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, and just, examine these. We didn't go alphabetically, as they are often listed, and just went with what seemed appropriate at the time, finishing with that broad category entertainment, under which we have subsumed various forms of media, including journalistic media, and the arts. We've had conversations as we move to the arts and thinking about art in the world we want. We've had conversation with filmmaker Frank Dawson. We were able to have conversations with veterans of the Performing Arts Society of Los Angeles community players about community theater in the 60s and 70s. We had dynamic conversations with a couple of visual artist sculptors, Charles Dixon and is it? I just went
Gautier.
blank on his name. Tasha, help me.
Gautier.
Gozier. Thank you.
Amy. Mm-hmm.
The And then last week, right? It was just a week ago. We talked to dancers, um, Nzinga and Dante, right? And that ended up being a really wonderful intergenerational conversation, as was the conversation with Charles and Gozier. So here we are again, right? We're asking the poets to share. So before we get to that specifically, we always start with a land acknowledgement, because we think it's important to always remind people that the United States is a settler colonial state. And we come to you from the Los Angeles basin, Tovangar, the home of the Tongva people. And I always think about the Chumash up the coast a little bit too. This is occupied territory, as so much of the world is occupied territory. And that should not go unremarked when people talk about borders, Americans, and who isn't and is an American, etc. So much of that are these fantasies that have been constructed and enforced, right, to make them reality. So we always like to point out, we know we do this work on the unceded lands of the Tongva people. We have 3 dynamic guests today. V. Kali, vegan chef healing agent, writer, calligraphy, creative gift design. V. Kali is the program coordinator for the Anansi Writers Workshop at the World Stage in Leimert Park, South Los Angeles. She schedules and books featured poets, creates and posts events to the website and Facebook page. V also hosts and co-hosts scheduled weekly workshops. She manages the open mic and the workshop curriculums, has been poet in participants since 1992. She moves chairs, sweeps, etc. Quote, Wednesdays I open and close the joint, unquote. V also owns Vanilla's Vegetarian Soul. I receive, download, and prepare vegan culinary delights gifted me from the source to the sauce. I nourish multitudes from the homeless to the well-known. Ask somebody. We are also welcoming Hiram Sims. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Hiram Sims is a poet, essayist, and creative writing professor. He received a BA in creative writing and an MPW in poetry from the University of Southern California. In addition to teaching essay writing, creative writing, and literature, he has published 3 collections of poetry, including Poems of a Young Troubled Mind, Write or Die, an anthology of poetry from the Urban Poets Workshop, and Photo-Oetry, poetry and photography from South Central, and his creative writing textbook, These Pages Speak. He is the co-founder of Community Literature Initiative and the Sims Library of Poetry, and co-founder of World Stage Press. I'm Hiram. And we are also graced with Bridget Bianca. Bridget Bianca is a poet and professor from South Central Los Angeles. She received her Bachelor of Arts in English from Howard University and her Master of Fine Arts in Writing from Otis College of Art and Design. Bridget Bianca has performed her poetry all around Southern California. Bridget Bianca's work as a writer and educator seeks to serve the people and moments most forget or ignore. Her first book of poetry, Be Trouble, was just released by Writ Large Press in 2020. Bridget Bianca also guest hosts literary events across Los Angeles and is one half of the literary curating teams Making Room for Black Women with Sonora Williams and South Central Spits Fire with Gustavo Guerra Vasquez. And I can attest to joining you and Gustavo for a reading at the Bethune Library. We welcome you all and thank you for being here. So let's talk about poetry in this world. Oh, you're welcome. And actually, I want to start there, right? This form, poetry. You know, I teach creative writing at Santa Monica College, and always the first class of the semester, I have to disclose, right, that I'm a poet, and this class is going to focus on poetry. All right, we may do a little fiction. No, not may. We will do a little fiction writing, but poetry is the thing, right? And I tell the students this because some come wanting fiction, right? And they're not looking for poetry, so that they can know that they need to go to another class, right? Now, Santa Monica is trying to reorganize that so students don't have to do that. But it always, makes me wonder about, why we choose our forms, right? So why poetry as opposed to a novelist or a playwright or even a screenwriter? And whoever wants to take it first.
Oh, I grew up, in the 50s back before we came to Los Angeles. I grew up with 6 uncles who are all like my big brothers. So, But the 50s was the right time for oral tradition in the Black community. Um, Everything was I didn't never saw anything written down. It was
Hmm.
just well versed and well
Mhm.
recited on street corners and parks and on stoops. And the flow was so inviting. I mean, I've always had a pencil. Before I did pens in my hair, I had pencils.
Mhm.
And I always wanted to write something down. They wouldn't let me write it down. They wouldn't let me write anything down. So I had to learn to, well, memorize. But it was awesome that the flow and the rhymes just took me over. So by the time Muhammad Ali came around with his verses, I was like, wait, this is my uncle's stuff.
Mhm.
Mm.
And by the time I got in the sixth grade and discovered E. E. Cummings writing in lowercase, I was done. It was poetry and having to memorize a poem, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it
Mhm.
on you. Sixth grade, I was smitten. It
Mhm.
just took me, I was gone. So nothing short of um, an ambulance would
Mm.
have kept me from doing poetry, being a poet. And then, of course, storytelling is poetry, so it's not really a different genre for me.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh,
I
Byron?
want to answer this question. I love what you said, V. Um, and for me, poetry is like a frequency that I can hear above
Mhm.
all other sounds.
Mhm.
Wow.
It's like a dog whistle,
Mhm.
like,
Oh.
and other people
My
just go,
dog, my dog.
right? They can't,
Mhm.
they can't even hear it, right? They go right
Mm.
past it, and I'm like, wait, 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 wait.
You hear
And
that?
so, like, like poetry has always been like omnipresent. Like in my own life, like the first time I remember hearing a poem, it's probably 6 weeks old. My mom took me to church, and
Mhm.
um, at at church, right before the sermon, they always read an opening lesson from the Book of Psalms, and the
Mhm.
whole Book of Psalms is the dopest poetry ever.
Yeah.
Like, and I still have them verses, just running all through me, like the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the
Mm.
world and they that dwell therein,
Mm.
like, and what was interesting about that to me is they could have chosen any passage, but they chose always the most poetic
Mhm.
passages, right? They could have been like, and Borab begat Asab, and
Right. Right. But
Levite
no.
begat right. Like, nobody ever read that, right? Like it was always, like whatever passages had the most poetry was in them. That's what was read. Like my mother had a lot of decorative poetry on the bathroom wall. And so when I was a teenager and just stanking, and refusing to take showers, I would just, sit there and just read the poetry that was on
Mhm.
the wall. But I think at a certain age, I began to learn that poems had power,
Mm.
like they had power and
Mhm.
sway with people. You know, um, I like this girl. I went to Fauché, which is, right around,
Mm.
like Western and Exposition. I like this girl, and she wasn't really feeling me. And then I wrote her a poem, and then I read it to her in front of her whole class on Valentine's Day.
Nice.
And then she was like, you know what? Maybe I will. Maybe I will hang out with you. And so that was my first girlfriend, and we lasted, and I think that was maybe sixth grade. We lasted a whole 2 weeks.
All
And
right.
that's in sixth grade, that's a baby marriage right
That's
there.
pretty good. Yeah.
So I was just like, whoa, like this like but what I was like uh touching, right, just a little bit is like how poetry very often just goes to the heart of people.
Hmm.
Like that honesty, that sincerity, and then when it mixes with that eloquence, right? And I just think that's what every poet desires, is to say the thing and say it well, in a way that can be remembered. So for me, like, and then my teacher started to notice that I was really good at poetry.
Hmm.
So they started to encourage me. And I remember in the eighth grade, my teacher, Mr. Bustamante, I'm sitting in this room with this one when I talk about frequency, right? I'm sitting in a room with these 30 kids, and then he said, I'm gonna read something to y'all. It's called The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe.
Mm,
And he read that poem,
mm.
and afterwards, like, the class, he was like, "What'd y'all think?" And the class was like, "Meh," and I was on the floor, like, I like, it laid me all the
Yeah.
way out, and I'm like, "Did y'all hear that? Like, did you hear
Yeah.
that? Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary over many." I ain't gonna quote the whole thing, but I could. Um, but I just think that it's like, uh I feel like the genre itself chooses us. Like it's really a gift from God, and the God's like, this is like, I'm gonna give this person plumbing, this one I give
Hmm.
carpentry, to this one poems. Like, and it's just like, I love what Mary Oliver said. She said, let the soft animal of your body love what it loves.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's
Nice.
it, right? Like, I
Yeah.
Yeah.
think we just love it, and somehow it has carved its own place in our life, you know, um, in a way that we can't ignore. So I'm gonna stop there. I want to hear from
That was
Bridget.
plenty.
Mm.
Bridget.
You know what? I mean, whew, do y'all hear these people? I hope y'all hear these people that you're listening to right now, because these are my teachers, in my opinion. I learn from Miss V every time. I learn from Hiram every time. Okay. Um, I was just sitting here thinking about, I discovered recently, I have a book of poetry by Langston Hughes called The Dreamkeeper. And I inherited it from bookshelves of the family. You know, I was a kid who was always pulling
Hmm.
the book down. If you're gonna pull the book down, you gotta read it. Ain't no problem.
Hmm.
I'm gonna read it. Every single time I pulled down Malcolm X, I read it. I was like 8 years old, didn't know what the heck I was doing, but I was in it. Like,
Hmm.
that was my thing. So I have those books still. So I've just recently opened up The Dreamkeeper again. And I realized that it was a book that my aunt gave my dad in 1986, the year that I was born. She gave him a book of poetry. Now, I don't know why she was giving him a book of poetry that was older than both of them. I'm not sure what happened. I don't know where, I don't know what the collection was. I don't know what was going on exactly, but it struck me that she said, bro, I think you'll need this, kind of in the cover, just a little message to him. And it's the same year that I was born. And I said, wow, I think it was always poetry from the beginning. My dad doesn't have a thorough poetry collection on his shelf, but he had The Dreamkeeper. And I took it down one day and I read it and I kept it because, as you do. And it's still with me. And I think about poetry as, I've tried to write other things. I was in middle school trying to write short love stories, don't know what I was doing. I was trying to write plays, don't know what I was doing. I tried to write
Hmm.
all kinds of things. Still sometimes, but it's always poetry. It's always, this is the best way to express this thing. There's a poet, Javier Zamora, who has a memoir out right now, but initially released a collection of poetry called Unaccompanied, and it's about being an unaccompanied minor traveling to America. And he said then that he was trying to write a memoir in the standard way, but it kept coming out as poems. He
Hmm.
could not stitch it into this grand prosaic, experience. It had to be a flash. You have to
Hmm.
compare you know, the airplanes overhead and the helicopters and the searchlights to bats. You have to talk about the people around you as ghosts. They have to be this like fantastical, childlike something. They have to be metaphor. They can't be real, right? You cannot
Mm-hmm.
access this trauma in a real direct way right just yet. And so it has to be poetry. And I thought that was so beautiful because I think for me, it has always had to be poetry. Every experience that I want to unpack, everything that I want to think about. And even when I'm like, you know, over analyzing things, it always comes back down to a poem, even when I don't want it to be. And Lord knows,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'm like, can I just say it straight? Can I just like even to myself, can I just write it
Yes.
out like this is it? No, gotta be a poem in the end, right? There has to be a simile sliding in there somewhere to really explain what exactly this feeling is. And I think I just gave into it. You know, it was always crashing over me, and I just said, okay, well, just carry me then. You know, this is poetry. Just
Mm-hmm.
take me. You know, there's no need to keep fighting it. And when I kind of like just just let myself into it, suddenly I discovered like, oh, I really love this, and I can really do this. And every time I tried to like guide the path, you know, graduate school, trying to write minimalist poems so I could survive a very white workshop. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I did what I had to do to get through. You know, I
Right.
survived. I can say
Right.
that now. My program doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. So I can say that now. Um, I survived it, and then when that was over, I promptly dropped. I
Mm-hmm.
dropped those little tools I was using to kind of guide myself. I went back to me because it was always poetry and it was always me.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about necessarily the craft survival lessons I was picking up. The skills I picked up were great, but the survival wasn't necessarily my success. So yeah, it's always been poetry, and I wish it could be other things sometimes, but also, who wants to hope against fate in this way?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I can run away from a poem for 2-3 years, and it's gonna find me.
And it's still there. Yeah.
Still there. So it's always been poetry. So yeah, that's why it's poetry for me because I didn't have a choice. Yeah, that's it.
All right. You remind me, some years back when I was trying to figure out, and I'm talking about some years back, yeah, decades ago, when I was trying to figure out, what exactly this meant to choose to be a poet. And that was when I was still writing extensively in my journals. And a journal entry that it really had less to do with how, with the actual form that one would use to write, but it was more about vision, right? And how one experienced the world and connectedness with the world. And, that's where the poetry was started in the vision and in our relations with the world, right? That comes out in the language in this particular way. So I appreciate y'all sharing those stories. V, you reminded me of my uncle who I just saw over the holidays, who would just recite off the top of his head, right? And he should be about that generation.
Yeah.
And just recite off the top of his head. So, you a poet? Boop up to boop up. I'm like, damn, Uncle Toby, I just can't. He would just do it like that, right? Coming from that generation, though, specifically. I just, man, anyway. Um, I'm gonna put these next two questions together because really they are kind of together. Because as we, thinking about this conversation, June Jordan flashed, across my mind, and I was like, yes, June is always great. I'm gonna go with June Jordan. And the Poetry for the People project, right? That she developed, and we put it in the questions that we sent you, and for the benefit of anybody viewing on YouTube, let me read it. Poetry for the People is an arts activism program founded and developed by June Jordan, right? So the late great poet, writer, activist June Jordan. In 1991, this was founded at UC Berkeley. Now, according to the UC Berkeley African American Studies and African Diaspora Studies website, this is a quotation. Poetry for the People continues to pursue Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of a beloved community for all. Poetry for the People has an academic focus on the reading, writing, and teaching of poetry, and the program also engages in bridging the gap between the university and the larger community. working with teens and young adults, schools, and community organizations and advocacy projects in the Greater Bay Area. So, if you have any familiarity with Poetry for the People, and in what way is your own practice in that same ethos, in that same modality of this, socially conscious and engaged poetry, and particularly poetry that is reaching out to community and folks who are not ordinarily invited into the circles. And again, whoever wants to pick up first.
Well, I got familiar with June Jordan around 92 or 93ish, because a whole crew of young people that graduated from Berkeley were at the world stage. It was Michael Datcher, D Knowledge, um, Ruth Foreman, um, ah, Terrell. What's his first name? He did the show with Peter J. Harris. I can see his face. Um, there was a whole crew of them, and they every time I listened to them, June Jordan was coming out of their mouths, and I
Mm-hmm.
had been familiar with her before that, and so I just kind of fell right in because everything I do pretty much is about community.
Mm-hmm.
So connected. I'm I'm more community oriented according to my children than I am to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way of my world, and that I've done street poetry and I've done a couple of pop ups back in the day and here and there. Um, but it's all for the good of the community. I used to think I write. I used to think I write just for myself. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't follow instructions. I'm just taking dictation. I just get up in the middle of the night and write stuff down in the dark because I know how to do that now. After so
Mm-hmm.
many years, it's just tag you're it, and so it goes. Um, um, Possession is what 9/10 of the law, and so therefore, and I am possessed.
You're possessed. Yeah. Yes. All right.
I wanted to, like to also answer this question. I think that my first answer was just going to be very similar to what V. Cully said, is except that I see a lot of those people as my teachers.
Mm-hmm.
That a lot of my teachers came out of her program.
Mm-hmm.
um, um, and Michael Datcher, especially, like in several other people um, at the world stage, and I think that they also were performing outside of the world stage at these various political events, these
Mm-hmm.
rallies, these gatherings, like all like their work and their presence and their art was there. And so, you know, um, so I feel like that June Jordan's presence, even though she didn't live in LA, has a huge place here.
Mm-hmm.
Like because her work, you could argue like, oh, her work is her curriculum or her writing, but really for a teacher, the work is our students,
Right.
like, and her students are here. And so I just feel like she has a really powerful presence here. And I think one thing that we try to do, I founded an organization called Community Literature Initiative, CLI, which helps writers of color to finish and publish books. And so we actually have ethics that we read right
Mm-hmm.
before every workshop. And so one of the ethics is to like identify the people that you are writing for and then find them and then offer your poetry as a service to that community. And so when the writers decide for themselves who they are writing for, it's never the people in the ivory tower. It's never
Mm-hmm.
like university students. Like they're writing for sometimes the people in their neighborhood. Sometimes they're a Puerto Rican woman, so they're writing for all Puerto Rican women. Like so there's something that they want to speak to when it comes to whoever they consider to be their own people. And so in addition to bringing your work to those people, one thing that we also champion is a certain humility when it comes to who and where you read. Like one of my favorite experiences is I was at the Vaughn's grocery store on Manchester in Inglewood, and I was walking in there, and the dude named Pierre Datcher was reading his poetry. He's like, anybody wanna hear a poem? Like I'm selling my books of poetry. Anybody want to hear some of my poetry? And so, I looked at that and I walked in the grocery store with my nose turned up, and so I'm over there by the hot pockets, and so I'm like, man, this dude outside is doing poetry in front of the grocery store. And then 10 seconds later, I'm like, this guy is doing poetry in front of the grocery store.
Right.
Like, this is an incredible person. I ran back outside and I'm like, please read me some of that poetry. And then he did, and he talked about how he just got out of prison. And all while he was in prison, his plan was to share poetry wherever the people were, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I bought his book, and I'm sure he sold a bunch of books that day. He sold more books than I did that day. Like, and so, like, but to me, when it's that important to you, like
Mm-hmm.
when you're down to read your poem on a corner in front of a grocery store, wherever the people are, that's what was so powerful about his presence there, is that people, like we're going in and out of that grocery store
Mm-hmm.
all day. Like so I feel like if the poet and any artist can humble themselves and bring their work to the people, then I think that the reward, will be great, and ultimately their artistry will help to reshape their community.
Yeah, love that.
Wow, y'all. Okay, so I'm just
Yeah.
thinking, um, as a student of poetry, I am appreciative of any opportunity to be exposed to poets doing anything, doing their business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think academically, as a professor, I never, I really had no intention of ever teaching creative writing in academic sense ever at all. Composition is what I teach. I plan to teach it forever in African American literature when they let me, like
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty set on that. I had no intention of ever letting the academy in on my poetry, because I don't do poetry to serve the academy. I do poetry to serve the people. And so folks who know me know that it was maybe 2 or 3 years before my colleagues even knew I had a book of poetry in the world. And I wasn't too keen on telling them. And not because I thought they shouldn't know, but because they didn't need to. The people that needed to know knew. And the folks that needed to get the poetry knew about it. And the folks who needed to be in workshop with me were in workshop with me. And it wasn't through the academy. Now, as things do, people find out that you do poetry. They're like, don't you want to teach the class here? Okay. Okay. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that and see how that goes. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
happily teaching creative writing now for an institution, but I still keep in mind who I'm preparing these writers to be when they go out into the
Mm-hmm.
world. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
preparing them to be the Academy's poets. I'm not preparing them. They can read a poem for their supper if they need to. We all have to do what we have to do. But I'm hoping that they are prepared to take their stories into the world with them and carry our stories with them and be the storytellers that are not commissioned necessarily to tell what the institution wants you to tell, and to tell what America wants you to tell, and tell what the West wants you to tell, but also just to tell the story as it's told, right? To be the conduit. And so that's why I wasn't interested at first. I'm like, no, they don't need that from me. This is actually, I don't do this in service to the college. I do this in service to my people. And so I wasn't interested. But now I'm learning, and I'm learning from reading about the careers of folks like June Jordan, of Nikki Giovanni, of folks who went into the academy and were able to still maintain their righteous minds, you know, right. Still maintain who they were, still do the work. And it makes me feel better because I was concerned. I was greatly concerned after my own experiences with poetry, after going to Howard and having this really, you know, very vast and explosive Black experience where there was just, oh my gosh, like the creativity was enormous. And then kind of having to fit myself into a shape to fit into the master's degree program type things. I was like, oh, I have no interest in ever doing that to one of my students. I don't want to be the one that does that to them. But then I learned, and actually just this past year, I learned this lesson. I learned that I'm part of the academy, and so I am in some ways complicit in a lot of the ways in which we muzzle. But I also have a great responsibility to make sure that I mitigate as much harm as I can, and that I remind them of what the actual work is. Like, we're doing this for the grade together for these 15 weeks, and this is the work. I'm going to teach you all the things. I'm going to go through all the stuff. But when you leave me, here's your next job. Here's your actual work. This is just the training ground to do what has to be done to meet the checks and boxes. And so I think I learned a lot from reading about their careers and looking into other workshop spaces and seeing, I mean, the results are the teachers that we have, right? And seeing how they go into the world. I hope, and this might be a naive hope because I'm still very new to this. I'm always new. I always say this. I feel like I've been around a while, but I feel very new. That hopefully one day, the legacy of the work that I'm doing will be that somebody else will say, you know, I had a class with her. She really she told me I could do this, and I'm doing it. And that's the hope. The rest of it is to be seen, but that's the hope, that somebody will say, I had a class with her and she told me about this other poet that was really great, and now I'm free. That's the hope. That's the hope for me.
Yes. Well, Bridget, you really kind of, you know, you really bring up the next area, right? And that's that I guess dialectic, right? The academy, the institutions, and community spaces, right? As a place to teach poetry, facilitate folks finding their poetic voice. So I'm just, you know, if you've had the experience of teaching in a college setting or a high school setting, you know, within a formal educational institution, and particularly one, you know, that's maybe predominantly white or mainstream. I don't know that a place like Santa Monica College would actually be predominantly white, so to speak, just based on the student body. But it's a mainstream dominant, you know, institution, right? You know, and what do people like to call SMC, the Harvard of the community colleges? Well, that makes it elitist to me, right? You know, that's a sign of elitism and you know, being part of the dominating institutions. So as opposed to teaching in the community, you know, as part of a workshop like like the Anansi Writers Workshop or CLI, right? If y'all could talk about, you know, those different types of experiences, or even as a student in either of those settings, you know, how those compare or contrast in your experience.
If I can jump in real early, and I'll be quick. I think as a person who sat in on Anansi Writers Workshops, I'll say the big thing I noticed was there was so much care. There was a lot of care. And there was craft and there was everything else, but there was so much care. And I don't know if there's always room in the curriculum in the academic spaces for that much care to be taken, to stop in a workshop and take care of the person in front of you who's brought their soul on this page and is hoping for feedback, right? We had a sister one day, she came in, she read a poem. She wasn't ready to read that poem out loud. It was obvious. It was obvious. So instead of going through and taking the poem line by line and change this thing, there was a moment of care given to her that I don't think the academic space would allow for time reasons maybe, or for whatever. But I think care is what's different. And it's baked in, it's built in, because we do actually care about what you're doing. And you, the person, we care about your story. We care about you being heard. We care about you doing the work. And I learned that lesson sitting there. I didn't even have a poem in my hand. I was just listening after work, just trying to soak in some poetry for the day was over. And I thought, yeah, you can't get this in standard classes. But I've heard, rumors have told me that it happens in CLI though. There's care. So I love that. I'm very happy. I mean, my goodness, today y'all are doing the work. I hope I can bring as much care into my classroom, but no, there's not enough room. There's definitely room what you all are doing.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, V. Go ahead, V. Go ahead.
You know, I never thought about that, but I mean, of course I remember that. In snatching some examples of differences, I taught a class in the summer of 2000 at Cal Arts. And I got there early, and the class that let out as I was waiting for it to end, all the children had green and orange hair and holes in their bodies everywhere and ink everywhere. And I was petrified. I just knew I didn't have anything for these children. I didn't have nothing for them that they would understand. And I just was like, okay, well, let's just go see what happens. And I got in there, and what I forgot was these were all writers. I didn't think about that. I just looked at the children and what they looked like. And there were maybe 2 Black children, maybe. And I got on that stage, and on that dais, and I looked around, and I was like, okay, Spirit, handle this. And that's exactly what happened. Care happened. And it is to date the best class, audience, group of people I've ever stood in front of. These children were from all walks of life. The youngest was like 15, the eldest was 19. One was from Simi Valley. Their father was a cop. The boy had long hair. He created a ring for me out of jute, and with a stone in it. By the time class was over, I mean, these children were just like all over me, and I'm looking at them like, where did you come from? Who sent you? Wait. If I could have written the poem then, How Dare You Love Me Like You Mean It, that would have been, I should dedicate that to them, because those children, the heart and soul of poetry was in them. When I asked how many were poets, and some were fiction writers, but I said, who is the best poet in here? And they all pointed to one child who became my godson, Jorge Monterosa. Jorge Monterosa. He said, well, I don't really. And I was like, well, everybody else in here says you do, so you need to come up here. What he did had me literally on the floor, prostrate, like he was the guru of life. I was done. I was toast. And then I immediately brought him to the world stage the next week. It was the care that commissioned me to carry that movement forward. Gosh, Bridget, you got me sweating now. I did a class at UCLA. Jerry Rabo, Dr. Rabo, was one of Deanology's professors. And I used to go and read poetry in his class from time to time. And then I did this one class, and I read something Pigtail Blues, and one of the students said, asked me why I was so angry, and I said, "Who are you talking to? Angry? Well, it was about straightening your hair and not wanting to straighten no more." And but it wasn't angry. It was just a matter of fact poem walking across the street. And of course, he didn't understand that it felt angry to him. And so instead of do what I could have done, there was so much care. I was so surprised at myself that the
Mhm.
care carried me away from his consciousness. I was like, who's talking here? Why am I talking to this child like this? Because you have to be careful with the word. You can't just mishandle it. You this is something that sleeps and lives with you. It eats with you. It's in your refrigerator, in your freezer. If you get caught mishandling the word, something bad gonna happen to you.
Look at that.
Something's
Mhm.
gonna happen.
Mm.
Some gonna, what Stevie says, some gonna get you, some gonna grab you, some gonna jump out the
Mm.
bushes and grab you. And so the difference between the university level or the middle high school, I don't treat them any differently because at my
Mhm.
age, they're all children,
Mm.
Mhm.
trust and know.
Mhm.
Um,
Mm.
and somehow there's no separation. That's the ticket. There's no separation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
All
wanted
right.
to V Kali was reminding me of just a couple things. They were using the word care, like I'm gonna use a different word. I'm gonna say I think that when it comes to these community based workshops and writing groups, that there's a lot of love there.
Mhm.
There's love and there's
Mm.
connection. You
Mhm.
know, at the beginning of every class in CLI, we do something called mood check, and as you ask your name, how are you feeling, and then the answer to a question that's relevant to the poem that we just watched. And I think um, I had that experience when I was in middle school and high school. There were just a few teachers who actually cared about me,
Mhm.
and they communicated to me that
Mhm.
they cared about me,
Mhm.
and they also held me to a high standard. And
Mhm.
I think that combination, like of I'm gonna hold you accountable for what we doing in here, and I also care about you. I love you. Like those are the teachers that I feel like we remember for our whole lives. Like the teachers who we, email or, send a message to on Facebook every now and then for our whole lives. Like, and to me, Connie Williams and V. Kali, like, these are my teachers and they care about me, like, and have communicated that. I have a line drawing of V. Kali framed in my house. Like that Billy, what's
Burgos. Burgos.
Billy Burgos did, right? Like, I mean, like next to my grandma and my aunties, like Vika's
Mhm.
in my house. Like,
Yes.
so that's the type of like love and connection that happens. I've had like another thing is that in CLI, um, because of this practice, like mood check, and also because we're in class together for a year
Mhm.
every week, like then we learn a lot about each other's lives through these questions, and I feel like that type of intimacy is often considered inappropriate
Mm.
in a academic setting. Like I've had my whole class in my living room, like doing poetry. And if I did that at a college, they fire me. Like if I told the department chair, yeah, I had the whole class in my living room. We were doing poetry and singing. So I feel like the sort of love and connection that's fostered in these community spaces. I want to mention two other things. Um, one has to do with a certain like level of support that happens. Maybe it's the only thing that I'll mention. Uh, a great poet of mine named a friend of mine named El Rivera. She
Yeah.
was hospitalized, and when she came out of the hospital, I asked her how she was doing, and she told me that the only people who came to visit her were poets in the hospital. Pam Ward,
Mm-hmm.
like some other folks. And I was just like, wow, like that really said a lot to me about the love and connection that happens, like when now this poet is at your sick bed,
Mm-hmm.
like that to
Mm-hmm.
me is like, how can, how can the leaders of these spaces, like cultivate that. And also, here's the second thing I want to say is that, like, when a student is in my class at the university, like, of course they are, um, like, some are bright, some are dedicated, some are not that interested, but everybody is at least trying to get a C so they can get
Mm-hmm.
out of there.
Hmm.
Right? Like at the very least, everybody trying to get that C so they can move on, like to the next thing. I have never once gone to the world stage looking for a C,
Right.
like looking for a B minus,
Mm-hmm.
like I went there to express something and to learn something. And I
Okay.
think when people show up for that reason, um, then something else happens.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, those are powerful experiences.
Mm-hmm. So see, that raises an interesting question for me as somebody who teaches creative writing and have to assign grades. Um, but I tell my class, I don't approach this class academically. Right? I mean, you're going to earn units, right? You're going to earn credits and they're going to transfer and all that, right? But this is not an academic class, right? I mean, this is a workshop class, it's experiential. You're just trying to be a better writer than you were when you came in and have some material, right? Produce some content that you can continue to work on. So I'm curious, how do you approach if you teach a creative writing class at the college or at a school? How do you approach grading?
Laughing because my grades are due. That's why I'm laughing right now. Um, I tell my creative writing students this: do the work. That's what's asked of you. Do this many poems and this many short stories, go to this many workshops, answer these questions, do the work. You do the work, you get the grade. You do the work, that's all
Right.
I'm asking for. You don't do the work, then you start dropping on the
Mm-hmm.
scale. But I don't like to grade A through F the quality of the writing, because if somebody asked me at 18 years old to write an A poem,
Yes.
and then somebody asked me at 37 years old to write an A poem, I don't know what that would look like, right?
Right.
But I know I can
Mm-hmm.
do it. I can try the poem. I can attempt the thing. And so that's all I ask of them. And then, of course, for the people that are phoning it in, they get a little nudge. You didn't really do
Mm-hmm.
the work. You didn't do the work. You didn't do the work. But it's about that. Do the work. And so I tell them, I said, there's no reason not to have an A in this class. I don't know what could possibly happen unless you're not doing the work. And that's the
Right.
agreement. I'm coming to work. You're coming to work. Let's do the work. And so that frees me, because I couldn't do it the A through F. It hurt me. I felt bad. I give a poem
Mm-hmm.
a C, and that's like, well, what do you do now? I could write the poem and make it an A in my mind and in my heart,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not an A poem to me. I mean, what does that
Right.
matter, right? And so I had to abandon that as much as I could, personally. And thankfully, fingers crossed, anybody's listening, thankfully it's working. because they're doing the work, right? And if they don't do the work, they know what's up.
Right.
But yeah, that's how I approach it. But yeah, my grades are due, so that's why I had to laugh.
Yes. Well, do you know when they're due, by the way?
The second, okay,
So
I
they're
got a couple of
due.
days.
Dang. Okay. All right. Because mine are due too. Right. And that's all I got left is creative writing. But that's cool. Uh, yeah. Somebody else want to get in on that? How do you approach grading your creative writing students?
I think it depends on, like, like what you're asking them to do. And I think in any class with grades, there's got to be like a clear rubric.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do this, get the A, do this, get the B, do this, get the C, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
but always the grades are a sort of carrot to get the students who care about the grades to
Mm-hmm.
keep working on it, to do more work on it, right? How about, maybe I give you this B, but I'm like, if you want this A, like, go ahead and put some punctuation in this poem, like, like, or or like, or read these other poets that are writing about the same subject as you, like, and give me a review of their work, right? I just think that um that ultimately we're asking students to do something, and I think if they do it, then they have earned that grade. And if they
Mm-hmm.
have not done it, and don't and have an opportunity, like, to do it, I think that I feel like there's two types of teachers that I've encountered in college. Like, the teachers that are like, it's on you. Like, they
Mm-hmm.
like, look, here, like, it's on you. Like, you didn't do it, boom, you fail. That's you. Like, you grown, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's the approach. Like, you grown. You didn't do it, you grown. So you fail, and that's it, right? And then there are the teachers who are like, I saw that you didn't turn this in. Can I talk to you after class? Like, how about we take this hour, and how about I just do it right now? Like, you got
Mm-hmm.
this hour. Won't you in office hour? Won't you just knock it out right now? Like, like, trying to, like, pull the work, like, out of the
Mm-hmm.
students who are, like, struggling. And I think anybody who's taught a class knows that there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of students that you're working with in there. And I feel like for any student who is willing to do the work, then the teacher should be doing all that they can to get the student to produce it. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so and CLI, but it's a little different though. We don't give grades in CLI. Like, what we're trying to get them to do is produce pages
Mm-hmm.
for their book. So the evaluation is like, did you add pages to your manuscript or not? And so if you did, fantastic. If you didn't, we might get up in your face. Like, we like, where you work at? And we might pull up to your job with a megaphone, like, we need that chapter. We
Mm-hmm.
need that last chapter of your book.
Yes.
So like, so we, trying to use our Debo skills, to punk people
Yeah.
into, writing that preface for their book. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the evaluation. Like, how what can we draw, a book out of a poet's mind? That's the goal in those classes.
V, did you have to grade those students at Cal Arts?
No, I did. Well, no, we had what do you call it? Um,
Reviews.
reviews, and then they had the term escapes me, but shortly thereafter, they had to turn in this work as a final. All the departments did, and I drove back up there like 3 days in a row to hear their whatever that was called.
Mm-hmm.
Work was extraordinary, just extraordinary. That these young people were writing like I was writing then. And I'm thinking if I was given the space when I was that age, if someone said, "Oh, was interested in that I was writing poetry," I would have had that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
That they recognized that that's what they wanted to do and didn't care who didn't care.
Mm.
It's incredible for that age group. I just the strength and the courage they had was incredible, incredible. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, there wasn't one person in that class who couldn't come to the workshop and stand up and get a damn.
Hmm.
Mm.
Just, I'd never.
Mm.
It was what's the child's name that comes to the stage? Ayana.
Mm-hmm.
It was like having a bunch of them.
Mm-mm. Wow.
I was just like,
Wow.
where did you people come from? I just there must have been a planet
Mm.
of a poetry planet, and they dropped you here and forgot about you. That's what happened. Just
Mm.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. I have a CLI specific question. Thinking about the you know, people producing those pages. Is CLI going to do another children's literature? Uh,
Yeah, actually, we're starting a children's book class February 1st.
February
Yeah.
1st. Okay.
Yep, first day of Black History Month. We're
As
bringing
I
that
did,
children's book class
you know,
back.
announce it or share, right? You know, contact CLI if you want to continue, you know, in my creative writing section, to encourage folks, you know, to join the program. And did mention that, you know, some of the students were interested in children's literature, writing children's literature. So I think CLI is doing that. You should check them out. So good. I'm glad to hear that. Um, but yeah, okay. We have a couple of more questions, and I'm gonna reshuffle the last couple a little bit, because I want to talk about, or I want to hear what you have to say about, you know, venues. Um, you know, since I moved back to Los Angeles, you know, after going to college in the Bay Area. And then when we moved back to Southern California, we were out in, you know, the San Bernardino area. So once I got back to LA proper and discovered this magical place called the World Stage, and that was when it was across the street. So that was always there, right? So it seems like the World Stage has always been there, but it's still, you know, I think about venues, right? And finding places to read, um, doing the open mic or the open reading circuit. So if y'all could just share and maybe how that's changed over time, right? What if those have been challenges, finding places to read, finding places to perform, creating spaces, right, for performance, whether those are pop up or what have you. So yeah, and please share what have those challenges been? Finding, you know, performance space, publishing space, getting the work out to people. Whoever wants to start.
I can start.
Mhm.
I think venues for poetry are like really interesting because poets are traveling with their art inside of them.
Mm.
You know, like
Mm.
especially for people who have memorized poems, or you
Mhm.
see poets
Mm.
pull up with
Mm.
that binder, right?
Mhm.
That's got, you know, 8 or 9 loose pieces of paper in it. So I say that to say I think there's so many different kinds of venues, you know, like in LA, and but most of the time poets are borrowing other people's space. So, like, we're using a community room in a library, right? Or, you know, like we might be use in a classroom, like at a school, or like might be in the back of somebody's restaurant, like one
Mhm.
week, and then like so many different places. And then you got places that are literary spaces, but they give poetry a night.
Mm-hmm.
Like the world stage, right? Got Wednesday night, and
Mm.
like Shades of Africa in Long Beach has got Saturday night, and then you got lots of like uh just giving some space, and I think that that's valuable, significant, important. Like I created a place called the Sims Library of Poetry, and we put on the gate, poetry lives here, right? As a message that the genre has a place to rest its head, right? It's not couch surfing anymore, right? We got,
Mm-hmm.
instead of
Mm.
Tuesday night, we got all the nights and all the days and
Yeah.
all the mornings, right? But I find that when you're dealing with venues, I think you're dealing with like the practicality of the 30-day society. Like
Mm.
I call it the 30-day society because they want that rent every 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
They want that light bill every 30 days. They want that
Mm-hmm.
gas bill every 30 days. And so like if you are either creating or running a space, then you have to deal with that. Like you have to think about in what ways can I make enough money to sustain this space for poetry. And what I have found, like in my like limited experience, I know V Khalid's been doing this a lot longer than me, but I find that poets show up and support these spaces. Like that poets give to these spaces. Like the Sims Library of Poetry is supported by donations, and 80% of the donors are poets. Like who understand the significance of these spaces all over the town, all over the county, all over the country. And I've been
Mm.
recently getting to look at poetry spaces in other cities. Like I just got back from Denver and went to two poetry spots out there. And again, this particular poetry spot was in a brewery. And the poets had their night, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
once a month they got the third Friday night. And so I just feel like poets are constantly carving out their space, if in formal and informal ways. And I always admire that, whether it's a big beautiful venue or it's a living room. Like I feel like if you put that mic up, like, and put some chairs out, we're gonna do our work.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Anybody else like to respond to that?
Um, in the beginning, um, there weren't a whole lot of venues that I was familiar with. In Lamert, of course, there was Fifth Street Dix and the stage.
Mm-hmm.
There was always Beyond Baroque from the 60s. And since you mentioned El Rivera, Hiram, in the early 90s, she was um, such a promoter. She would commandeer chicken restaurants, chicken joints, and
Mm.
we were reading at, bookstores, midnight special bookstores, books in Santa Monica, and
Mm-hmm.
we were reading all over the phone company room, and we'd get $5 for the reading. I mean, she had us reading everywhere, everywhere. Um, and then of course, the poetry lounge on Tuesday, and um, we were reading in people's living rooms and wherever we could. I think. Oh, and then we started reading on the street, on the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now I think it's, there's Swam and there's Long Beach, a lot of venues in Long Beach. It's important more than not. Oh, and Hot and Cool Cafe in Lemert, Barbara Morrison's. I think it's important more than not to just spread the word, that the word spread so that everybody has an option, because we're really lucky because we've got one poet who comes from the Big Bear area. I didn't know he was coming from Big Bear to read poetry every week.
Wow.
Wait, I gave the brother a hug and his jacket felt like the Arctic. And I said, "Where are you coming from?" I said, "Wait, you're coming every week from where?" Lancaster and Fullerton. Will Hawkins used to ride his bike from Fullerton. It's important. It's so important that you will start a trek in the afternoon to get there by 7:30. Jeez. That's the dedication, dedication of the heart, the will, the sheer will to keep this thing going in your circulation. And so like that.
I have to mention, when I first met V. Kali, first of all, she popped me with her locks on my legs. I said, "Oh, she loved me." And then she told me to come to the world stage. And I had never been invited to the world stage before. I didn't consider myself to be a person who was reciting poetry aloud to people until that year. So I was like, okay, I'll come. And then I was like, okay, I'm never going to leave. This is it now. I'm going to be here forever. And when I get a little need, I'll be there once again in the back. But I have to mention, as a poet, something that happened when the pandemic hit is suddenly we became poets without borders. We didn't need a venue anymore. I didn't need anybody to say that the poets would come in. I didn't need anybody telling me that we were too loud, or that, can we keep it down? Can we get out of here by 6 o'clock to put the chairs back, or whatever it was? Suddenly I could sit in my house. And when the pandemic hit, for folks who don't know, a car hit my house. So I was literally sometimes sitting in my closet. I was sitting in a bathroom. I was sitting in front of the microwave. I was sitting tucked in a hallway. I was sitting in my car. I was sitting in somebody else's house that I drove to so I could get the Wi-Fi, so I could do the thing and not have the electric saw going or whatever it was. And I could still have poetry any place. Right now, I got an iPad, a cell phone, and my laptop in front of me just in case one of these things fails me.
Right.
I can still get the poetry. Okay. So like when I think about poetry in places, I'm gonna go wherever the poetry is. And I'm glad that poetry can be anywhere, right? Like Hiram said, it's the poet brings it with them everywhere, whether they have their book on them, a notebook or a napkin. They got poetry on them when they show up. We can do it anywhere. I remember the first ovary office I did with V. Kali and Pam and everybody. Oh my God. We were tucked into, I think it was a patio to a restaurant, maybe. And we never went inside. Nope. I don't know where we were at, but we were inside the fence doing the poetry with a little light. And then there are people walking down the sidewalk stopping to listen to us. It was for Lit Crawl LA. And we were literally crawling. I mean, you remember? Okay, I said, okay, we're doing this. This year, Ovary Office had us at a mausoleum. Okay, in Pasadena. Yes. So I said poetry could be anywhere. And I love that. But I have to mention the digital. I mean, look at us right now.
Right.
We can have this conversation. I don't know if we understand the importance of the archival nature of us being able to do poetry anywhere and have it documented by default. This moment is happening. It's live streaming here. It's going to be re-recorded for this. It's going to be clipped up in this. Like, that is so amazing. We can't duplicate the in-person experience. No, absolutely. That's a different thing where you have to be there to feel it, right? But there's something about this as a venue space, quote unquote, that feels so intimate and so personal. And I've seen poets who were very shy and kept to themselves and afraid to be on camera. I've seen them come alive virtually.
Yeah.
I've seen them like turn their cameras on for the first time and say, you know, thank you so much. That is a thing we can't ignore. And I think it's such an extension of the care we were talking about, that you can be in your home, you don't do nothing, just sit there and listen to me and listen to yourself. And that's it. Let's just be together. That was so important for me when the pandemic started. So I can only imagine how it's going to continue, you know, as a venue space, be really important for all of us to connect in this way. So yeah, I just want to mention that.
I'm glad you did mention that. And of course, we had you and V do a special reading for the Joko along with DJ Watson, right?
Yeah.
Within the pandemic, right? So yes, and that was a wonderful reading. The so we've come to the final question, and really, the final two questions, but that question about the social function of poetry, I mean, it really is asking the same thing. How do you see poetry in the world we're trying to create? One that is more just, more free, etc. So before we get to enjoy hearing from each of you poets, if you would just, briefly answer that question for us. How do you see poetry getting us to that world we want to create, the one we're building, right? That creative process of a more just world. And then in that world, right? Poetry's function. So, I mean, I'm asking you to be brief, and that's a very big question, but anyway, you can handle it as you can.
Basically, I think that the greater the injustices we see, the greater the poetry will be. Because we can't sit still. We can't sleep. I know if I'm tossing and turning, everybody else is.
Mm-hmm.
I know that when a child of mine is weeping in his shoes because he turned on social media and saw something that was happening to a child and couldn't bear it and was weeping about inhumanity to man. You can't just walk out and go get some sugar for your coffee or some chips and let that rest. We are in spiritual unrest right now. Spiritual, civil, it's all unrest. And there's a balance for that. And ta-da, what do we do because we have to? Tag your it. Show me what you got. Show me what you working with. And so that I see the prescriptions, the RX being written on the walls and fences and sidewalks everywhere. The work that when coming to Lemert / World Stage / Anansi and calling it and feeling that it has been the Harlem of the West and the Renaissance. All this time, what's happening now, what's been happening in the last 10 years of the maiming and lynching of our children, our people, women and children, and how it's extended across the waters to other people's children, etc. There's a wave. There's a tidal wave that is moving. I can feel it. It's like a wave of electricity. It's like a current. And it's
Mhm.
kind of sweeping, like doing a panoramic view, like a camera. And it's taking care and bringing care of and to all those avenues, all those things that need to be addressed. Because we can't, how can we live if we don't address it?
Mm.
And when we address it, everybody else is going to have to address it because poetry is nothing but music.
Mhm. Right.
That we sing and we dance and we live to and live through. So get more pen and get more ink.
All right. That'll work.
What a great answer, right?
Right? Yes.
I,
You want to add
you know,
anything?
yeah.
Hiram?
One of the things that I thought about what is gosh, five different thoughts, right? One of them was James Baldwin, and I was listening to a speech of his, and he gave a whole lecture on the protest novel.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Mm,
first time I ever heard that phrase. Like a protest novel, and that he felt like the novels that he wrote were protest novels and had their place in the civil rights movement. In addition to his activism,
Mm-hmm.
his interviews, his speeches, right? Like that his
mm,
novels actually had a significant role to play. So I feel like if protest novels exist, so too can protest books of poetry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I have so I feel like individual poems and books of poetry have like throughout time had their utility in the movements of all the different eras. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that there are certain people that are only going to hear it clearly in a poem. Like there it's the only way to reach them because it's
yeah.
the only way to reach me.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like, so
Mm-hmm.
I just like you can talk, you can lecture me, talk to me about things until you're blue in the face, but if you put it in a poem, like I
Mm,
can hear it and I can remember it. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that
mhm.
uh, that poets have a responsibility to do their work as a part of the movement to make the world increasingly better. And
Yeah.
I think poets should see their poetry as the contribution. I was thinking about Georgina Jackson, like who during the civil rights movement uh, was an incredible cook, like, and she made the best greens, the best yams, the best, like, and then she started making plates for the movement.
Mm-hmm.
Like Martin Luther King would be preaching inside the church, and then all the people would come out and buy her food, and then she gave that money to the movement.
Mm-hmm.
Like Martin Luther King would be in Philadelphia and would say, "Can you please cook me some greens? Because can't nobody cook greens in this whole city." and, then,
That's
and
cold.
then she would cook them and send them to him in Philadelphia,
Mm.
right? Like, and to me, that is such a powerful example of someone doing what they do
Mm-hmm.
to contribute. This woman had Medgar Evers in her kitchen, Martin
Mm-mm.
Luther King, Abernathy, all of them. Like she's feeding these activists. Like never gave a speech.
Right.
Like but literally rallied people. Like to feed the movement. So I can think of 16 other examples, right? Like if you think about um, Dick Gregory, like in him doing stand up in the movement,
Yeah.
literally telling jokes to cops and stopping them from
Mm-hmm.
beating black people in the street, right? Because they're laughing so hard. They can't even take the baton out to crack heads, right? Like, it's just like, I feel like people must do their own work, like in
Yes.
support of the movement, like to make the human experience a better experience, while we have breath in our body and ink in our pens.
Mm.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yes. I was
yes.
just thinking of something I tell my students in African American literature in particular. I tell them we don't study Phyllis Wheatley because she was the greatest poet ever in the world and that she was the only poet ever of the time and that her poetry is always going to be the best thing you ever read before in your life. We're not studying her for fandom. We're studying her because you have to remember, and we have to remember, and they had to also remember that we were human the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So the purpose of us writing poetry and telling our stories is to remind people that we are human and to remind ourselves of our humanity. That we can write a poem to, George Washington or a love poem. You can write about
Mm-hmm.
your sorrows or about your ancestors. You write about the redwoods. You can write about crime. You can write about all these things because it's proof that you are thinking and that you are here. And the reason why it's so important for us to study literature and to look back at those things and even think about the oral tradition. And I mean, I tell my students, I say, people thought that the enslaved were not smart and yet they were singing songs. Well, what the heck did you think we were doing out there? What did you think was happening? We were singing songs. We weren't singing your songs. You knew that, right? So where did you think it came from? But our hearts and our humanity. So I say we study these things because we have to remember. And so part of the work of the active writer in the moment is to remember that you are leaving trails for
Mhm.
study. You are leaving proof of your humanity
Mm-hmm.
and in this moment. So you're writing this book and maybe nobody buys it, but the book exists. And
Yeah.
someday somebody might need a reminder that
Yeah.
somebody was alive and they had these thoughts and they had these ideas and they had these wonderings, these ponderings, like you. I mean, Emily Dickinson locked all her stuff in a trunk, child.
That's
Okay, and we
right.
study her every year,
Every
good
Mm-hmm.
or
year.
bad. Sign number one, pull it out, right? And so, like that the idea of like this is how we remember and we prove, but also most importantly, remember for ourselves. So I think that is the work of poetry, and particularly when it comes to liberation and when it comes to fighting and when it comes to fighting against larger powers, colonial powers, impossible powers in some cases, the audacity to continue to write and create and make beautiful things and to document in the face of that is even more proof of your humanity. That all could be lost. I mean, I'm thinking about right now the poets coming out of Palestine.
Yes.
I'm thinking of
Wow.
the artists and the journalists and people saying it doesn't matter because you could kill me today,
Mhm.
but I'm writing poetry. I'm singing songs. I saw a child singing a song. Child's family's gone.
Mm-mm-mm.
Look how important it is to see. Look at you cannot ignore. I mean, people ignored our humanity for a long time as Black people here
Mm-hmm.
in the Americas. And then they would trot us out when we had a special skill because we were
Right.
suddenly human now. Look at how good this Black person can do this thing. You see, I mean, I guess he could be human, like that idea, but to remember that the first proof is for yourself and not for the external, but for the internal, and to continue to remember and force them to remember through your work. You don't have to be
Mm.
quiet about it. You can write about anything. I got kids write about fan fiction about Transformers, okay,
Mm-hmm.
the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. You love Transformers? Got the
Mm-hmm.
allegory? Write about it. Let's do it. Prove something to somebody, to yourself, that it's important, right? And so I think that's the role of poetry, but writing, storytelling in general. But it's that proof, it's that memory, remembering, re-remembering. In some cases, like Toni Morrison says, re-remembering. That writing lets us do. And also, last thing, people think poetry is scary, right? What a weapon to have in a fight, a thing that people are confused about and worried about. They're looking for all kinds of similes and metaphors and hidden
Mm.
meanings in a simple thing.
Right.
And the people who hear the simple thing and the other thing too. And they're
Mhm.
not scared. They're not afraid, actually. And that's the beauty of poetry. Let it be scary. That's cool. You're going to miss something.
Right.
Guess what? I slipped in that third line. You didn't even know it was coming. Great. So, yeah, that's what the role of poetry for me.
Thank you all. So a treat, right? We like all of you to read some of your poems. And I believe we're going to go back to the screen share. Oh, whoops. There we go.
Why I
And
got to always go first? I'm not going first. I'm gonna pull age on that all of you. I'm not going
okay,
first.
well, you don't have to go first. Go to the next person, Tasha. Hiram, you get to go first. In fact, we will go Hiram, Bridget, and we will finish with V.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, all right. So is it one or two?
Uh, at least two, well, one or two or 5 minutes. But don't
Okay,
worry
all right.
about the minutes. Ain't nobody reading the clock. Just, pick a poem.
Okay,
And if you
all
feel
right. I'm
like
gonna
it,
do
read
one.
another
I'm gonna
one.
do one and then ask if you want me to do the
Okay, cool.
seconds. Um, all right. So this is a poem that I wrote. Bridget talked about like a poem, sort of just like being there, and then you ignore it for a couple of years, and then it come right back. So this is a poem that just kept harassing me, and I
Hmm.
ended up writing it at Compton College on a whiteboard.
Hmm.
That's when the whole thing finally came out. And for those of you who don't know, me and my wife have 6 children. And that's what happens when you just listen to too much Luther Vandross. Like 6 chilling. And so this is a poem that I wrote um, about them. One night I was counting eyelashes on my sleeping daughter's eyes, and like that's part of where the poem comes from. It's called "The Gift of Numbers and Arrows." I used to hate math, considered it enemy to my lyrically infested ambitions, considered them enemies and weirdos who love the warmth of a quadratic equation, consider them foes whose vocation it was to teach me the labyrinthine functions of a graphing calculator, as if I would ever love it. I hated math. I used to dream that algebra would die in a forest fire,
Hmm.
used to hope and pray that calculus would pick a fight with Mike Tyson and get bit up. I used to dream that geometry would swim out to the Bermuda Triangle, never to be heard from again. And then I saw them, one, then the other, then the other, then the other, then the other, then the other. The most beautiful calculations God ever gave breath. My babies, clothed neatly in isosceles, acute and obtuse milliliters of love. So I started counting. 5 trifold fingers plus 5 more on 12 beautiful baby hands, that's 120. 10 tiny taupe and oaken toes firmly fastened to 12 brand new legs, that's 120. 176 eyelashes to shield 3 beautiful sets of Dora the Explorer loving eyes times 10, that's 1,760, leading to 600 blinks per day per eye. That's 14,400 openings and closings of little eyelids for every sun. So I kept counting. 5,753 baby diapers I had to buy that I couldn't reuse even if I wanted to, times 6, 34,518. But who's counting? 2,190 diapers full of dookie they drop every year, divided by 365 days in 1 year. That's twice a day. I have to smell stankin' children. 18 billion cells in every finger that will point and curl and tell a young boy to come closer. So I'll need one giant shotgun, two barrels, three bullets to scare off any little neighborhood punks who foolishly think they are worthy enough to talk to one of my numbers, my digits, my integers of legacy. And every day, when I hold these six whole numbered children in my arms, I thank God that math always will be and always has been my favorite subject.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Mm.
So
Please
one
read
more.
another
We're
one.
moving on.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
please read another one.
Okay, one more. All right, this poem's for my wife. One day my wife told me, um, she was like, I don't like when you say, when you introduce me and you say, this is my wife. And I said, you don't want to be my wife? And she was like, no, it's not the wife part. It's when you say my wife. And we talked a little bit more. And then this poem came out. It's called "Love Is No Conqueror" after Neruda's Sonnet 17. I do not love you like a hunter loves seeing a full-grown fallow deer in the wilderness, ripe for the knocking down and gathering up triumphantly. I love you like that wilderness meeting a river for the first time, knowing how many living things will need them both, separate and together. Separate and together, two names, but one name older than the people who named them. I do not love you like a crashing wave loves wet sand, always begging to wash over you with my thunder and spreading. I love you like wet sand loves dry sand, eternally side by side, ever yearning to teach the other how deep and far and wide we go. I do not love you like a bison loves blades of grass ripe for the eating on tomorrow's forthcoming prairie. I love you like a blade of grass loves a blade of grass, knowing we were meant to grow together and shine together and sway together, and that we together are beauty, simple and plain. You are the side and side of my side. I am the side and side of your side. And I love you without sound, without time, without place, without reservation, without conditions, without possession, while we possess each other. I love you out in the open, one hand inside of another hand for all to see. I do not love you like readers love thumbing through the pages of books, volume increasing by volume. I love you like pages love book covers. Wrap around me, wrap around me, wrap around me. All right, that's it. That's it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right on. So our next poet then will be Bridget Bianca.
I'm over here like, woo,
I
wrap
know,
around
right?
it. Come on
You
now.
still need a minute? Right, I know.
Start loaning that poem out on the street. Okay. Do that in front of the grocery store. I think more folks need to hear it. Okay,
Mhm.
please. Okay, I'm gonna read two pieces, one from Be Trouble and then one that is available online. Both these poems are dedicated to the memory of Niani Finlayson, a young sister who was just killed by the LA Sheriff's Department early December. She called the police to have them come because her boyfriend was abusing her. And they arrived and said and shot her 4 times in 3 seconds and took her life. So this is for Niani Finlayson. A Saturday night. What do you do when you see lights in the rearview mirror? What do you do when the siren loops around your throat? What do you do when you are on the street in a group of 4 or more? What do you do when you are alone? What do you do when you know you don't have anything in your pockets that can hurt the officer? Keep your eyes on the road and find a safe spot to pull over. Turn that noise on your radio down before the officer approaches your window. Didn't they teach you in high school that 4 or more of you is a gang? Don't you know you shouldn't be out here alone? Don't you know that your skin was weaponized in the womb? Speak only when spoken to. Don't matter that you wasn't doing nothing. Don't matter that they be doing this all the time. Don't matter that we don't be bothering nobody. Don't drop the G's from your ings. Don't ask questions. Ask permission to reach into your purse for your wallet. You should just clench your license between your teeth and smile while you are doing it, but not too hard. Black joy is suspicious. Keep your hands above your waist. Keep your hands on the hood of your car. Keep your fingers locked behind your head. Take your foot off the gas pedal. Keep your feet more than shoulders width apart. Keep your eyes on the ground. Do not stare defiantly into the officer's eyes. Do not call out in pain when his knee is on your neck. Do not call out in pain when his knee is on your neck. Do not call out in pain when his knee is on your neck. Go limp like a rag doll when they grab you. Do not bristle when the officer cups your vagina. If you ever find yourself being Black on a Saturday night, don't. That is that one from Be Trouble. And I'm going to read one more. This one is for Jacob Blake. I'm kind of getting mad now. I'm like, should I read something else? I don't want to be mad for the rest of the show. Y'all know how it goes. You know how it goes.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to read something else instead so I don't get too pissed off this evening. This one hopefully is a little bit better, right? This one actually is dedicated to all the good white folks that I know and all their well intentions. It's called White Knuckled Emails. I heard something bad happen to a Black person, and then I remembered you were a Black person, and maybe you might know them. Wait, is it racist to think that Black people know each other? I mean, I saw their skin and it was a lot like yours. Not that I'm saying all Black people look alike, but I'm saying I saw Black people on the news getting pepper sprayed, and I wondered if you were out there because I couldn't pick you out of a lineup. I mean, a crowd. I mean, I can't tell you apart from the other Black lady in the hallway whose name I called you the last time we spoke. At least I think it was you. The virus is killing Black people. The news said it has to do with institutionalized racism. I mean, pre-existing conditions and vitamin D and melanin. My daughter taught me to say melanin, to say diversity, to say people of color and not colored people. Of course, I would never say colored people. My father used to say he knew some very fine colored people, but my daughter, she said, Papa, that's not nice to say. Now you say African American. And he voted for Obama both times. And it's a shame how all of those businesses have to suffer. I mean, what would Dr. King say? Violence against unarmed and defenseless property is not the answer. Not saying that you would steal, but I heard that's what happened in your neighborhood when you were a little girl. Is it racist to ask you if you feel safe in your neighborhood? Maybe you should call the police if you see anything suspicious, like a Black boy in a hoodie, or a Black girl mouthing off, or a Black person outside after curfew, or outside at all, or just a Black. Do you think when all is said and done and all of this is over and we find a vaccine for racism, I mean, the virus, I mean, when we don't see color anymore, that we can go back to normal, back to when bad things happen to a Black person and I didn't think about it and I didn't think about you? White knuckled emails. Thanks, y'all. Thanks, y'all.
Woo! Yes, fire. Thank you. I don't know, that seemed like that might make you mad too. That one. But better to be mad than sad, right? So anger can be quite healthy, the quite healthy response. So now we will hear from V. So we got to go the other way, Tasha. There we go. Let's see. Okay, yes, there we go. Anytime you're ready, V.
I think
Oh,
V's over
you're
there
still
writing.
muted. Hold on. Okay, there we go. I just asked you to unmute, V.
I have to do it that way. Okay.
There
I
we
was
go.
trying the wrong way. Okay. This flyer is so lovely. Jeez.
Mhm.
That is our graphic artist, Tasha.
Gosh. My goodness. Grief stricken. Grief stricken. Been searching the web to find something to laugh at. To take this pain out my gut. Lump in my throat. Gag out this choke. Surfing the net I've been working without. I feel I've fallen through, cracked. The king has no horses, the king has no men, and I feel I shall never be put together again. He speaks. Between third rib, the sun, and the space between my words. He speaks, I hear, we dance. 7-year itch, oh holy alliance. Spirit orchestrated tango has never been like this. He holds me. Between thumb and index, dabs me just behind his ear. I am amber in his memory, the scent of his belief. Smells like Jesus everywhere.
Mm.
Lung, inspiration, there be no expiration date. Our shelf life's hymn spot. All breath be holy, but this breath be mine. Divine intervention he drum daily to my heart, and we sing each other into revelation. It is the revolution we have been waiting for. It is the love, the Damascus he speak over me.
Mm.
Moves our generation next to being born into their father's hand and through their grandma's eyes. They look like Nana and Poppy all over again, and we be born again through the God of second chances and the love of I am. Say he speak, and it is done. Amen, Ashe. Amin, Ashe, Amen, and a woman.
Mm.
Mhm.
Mm. Yes. Wow. Wonderful. That brings us to the close of our program today. And I mean, I'm going to say to Tasha, we did a good job because we brought on some boss poets.
I'm saying, we hunted y'all down. How many months? We want y'all to come on
Hey,
the show.
oh, that was wonderful. Thank you. Thank y'all. You went away from the slideshow, Tasha. That was our Asante Sana
We'll put
slide.
that to you. Mhm.
Thank you to the poets. Thank you, V. Thank you, Hiram. Thank you, Bridget. You know, I feel so fortunate, and I know Tasha does too, that I mean, we have relationships with you, right? That you aren't just guests that we invited, but it's just so good to know that we are in community together and are able to work together, read together, and hear each other and all that. And just thank you so much for your contribution to these conversations on art that Joko is trying to share with folks. Uh, um, People out there in YouTube world, look them up, right? Look them up. CLI, Community Literature Initiative, the Sims Library of Poetry, BridgetBianca.com, V Kali, I know V is on LinkedIn, Anansi Writers Workshop. Check them out, y'all. Check us out. Joko Collective channel. Y'all all need to be liking this. Share it. Subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends and family about it. Art matters. We need art. We need all the arts for our spiritual edification and our external edification, right? Because it does make the world a better place, a better environment. So that's it for today. The Joko is out.